If you've watched the previous video where we looked at Alien Resurrection, there'll be a link below in the description. We looked at the distinctive characteristics around the game and its development, that it wasn't all plain sailing, that it was marred by development hell as such. But at the end of it, it ended up presenting some very interesting characteristics, some of which would go on to set the new foundation for the landscape of video games moving forward, especially with its control systems, with console controllers using the twin analog sticks as the main format for moving the character around and interacting with items and objects on the screen. And that would be the main focus of control systems moving forward even to the current day. So while the original game might have been met with mixed reviews, it did set standards in its own way, and the games that we do play today would have and could have been very different. But even with the development of Alien Resurrection, there are prototypes that did find their way out into the wilderness online. Now if you do go looking for them, you can find them, and one, as we see here, it is a playable version of it. It's an early alpha build. Now there are a couple of different variants that were leaked online, and they do work to a certain degree. It has a lot of intro sequences. There's even elements in this prototype that were cut out of the final edition of the game, so that alone is worth having a look, to be honest, to see even more content. But the game would play from a third person behind the character, almost like Tomb Raider style, and would be very different from all of the concepts seen in the final edition. It's still dark, gritty, although it's not as dark per se as the final edition, with the likes of the environments that you're in, again because it's still an early build of the game. One of the major issues with it is that the control system doesn't work all that well. Yes, it is playable, like I said, but some of the button interactions and some of the features inside don't work the way that they were intended to work. Like, you can move around and you can shoot, but the problem is that when you're shooting you can't really aim or even really hit anything. Sometimes you do, but it takes ages to kill anything, and it just sometimes just doesn't work at all. But this alpha build of the game is quite long. There's a lot of different areas that you can explore. The graphics themselves aren't half bad considering that it's in full 3D as well, but you'll find that when you play it, the cursor that you use to aim at different characters just be all over the place, and sometimes it doesn't aim directly at whoever you're supposed to shoot at. Now even though it's a third person shooter, the camera does have a dynamic element to it that you can move it around the character at different points, and a lot of the elements seen here would make it into the final edition of the game, although from a different perspective. But it's still interesting to see this working, and this alongside of a lot of other games that were being developed on the PlayStation did have early builds that would have been either used for the final edition or that were changed completely through development. One notable example is probably the most well known would be the Resident Evil 2 edition that would end up becoming Resident Evil 1.5, that was nearly finished and then cancelled late into the development cycle and then was replaced with the game that we finally got, which in itself is a masterpiece in horror games. But the 1.5 edition now, a lot of people would say that they don't like it, which everyone has their opinion, but I still think it's an interesting idea, and the fact is the fans have managed to get access to certain elements of the original game concept and they're trying to piece it together, and the fact is that you can play certain variants of it online currently shows the true commitment of fans to allow these games to work. And the same can be said with a lot of these other prototypes. Yes, a lot of them don't work the way that they were originally intended, but the fact is that they are running at all is definitely worth having a look, and you can only but applaud those that managed to get it working in the first place. Like, there are quite a few games like this that were in development that had different builds, like I said, that were either cancelled later on in development or even cancelled early in development but still managed to have playable builds, which you can find a lot of them online if you go looking for them. I have covered a few of them previously on the channel, which I'll leave a link to in the description, and they might also be worth checking out because there's a different variation of different games, anything from like shooters to point and click strategy games, racing games. There's quite a few out there on the PlayStation that didn't see the light of today, but are still worth checking out. Now the fact is you can play them with emulation. They're definitely worth a go. Even in their unfinished state, they're still worth a try. But this is just an interesting look back into what could have been, pretty much, because Alien Resurrection, while it wasn't the best game seen on the PlayStation at the time, and it was heavily criticised because of certain elements, mainly with the controls, and I think it was really just down to the fact that us as players weren't really willing to adapt to change. You were kind of just stuck and set in your ways, which people genuinely are and still are even to this day. So anything new that does come along, it takes us a while to really figure it out or even to respect it. But now when we look back, people do respect those concepts because, well, we have to now, because it's the main format of the way games are played today. So without games like this, the games we play simply wouldn't exist. But still, it's interesting to go back to see the early ideas and concepts of what was happening back then, and like I said, worth a try at least. But all I'll say is just a word of warning: if you're looking for a perfect example, don't expect that with these prototypes, because they're not perfect. They are in an unfinished state. Yes, they do work, but they're not going to play the way that you would expect them to work, which can lead to frustration. So if you're one of those players that has no patience at all, you might be best to leave it and just avoid it at all costs. But if you're someone that's a bit more curious like myself, that wants to understand more about these concepts and even the early years of gaming, definitely give it a go. But with that being said, I would love to know your thoughts of this Alien Resurrection prototype, or what did you think of the original game when it released? Have you even played this prototype yourself? It will be interesting to hear your stories on it, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around more prototypes like this that were in development on the PlayStation, I have covered a few of them previously, like I said, so I'll leave a link to a playlist here on screen so that you can see them in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.